when my ex-fiancé snatched the microphone at our 10-year high school reunion, pointed at me, and laughed about how I'd spent a decade as a glorified, broke nobody, the entire ballroom went dead silent. Everyone was watching, pitying me, waiting for me to break down in tears. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 5 years quietly building a multi-million-dollar tech empire. But I didn't say a single word. I just waited. And right on cue, the heavy grand doors swung open. When my husband walked into the room, flanked by the private security detail and holding a legal foreclosure notice for my ex's entire business empire, my ex's face drained of every ounce of color. Stay tuned until the very end to see how an arrogant bully got served the ultimate humble pie, and comment below where you're watching from. My name is Chloe, and at 28 years old, I thought I had left the petty dramas of high school far behind me. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Grand Oak Hotel wearing a simple, elegant dark emerald dress. I wasn't looking to make a massive scene or draw any unnecessary attention to myself. I just wanted to catch up with a few old friends at our 10-year high school reunion, grab a quiet drink, and leave early. That modest plan evaporated the second the double doors opened and Brad strutted inside. Brad was my ex-fiancé, and he entered the room like he owned the entire city. He was draped in an overpriced designer suit, loudly flashing a diamond-encrusted watch, and aggressively boasting to anyone within arm's reach about his supposedly skyrocketing real estate empire. Then his eyes locked onto me. A cruel, familiar smirk spread across his face as he walked over, deliberately raising his voice so the entire surrounding crowd would turn and listen. Well, if it isn't Chloe, he sneered, his tone dripping with fake pity. Look at you, still dressing like you're on a high school budget. I hear you've spent the last decade working as a glorified, broke nobody while I built a fortune. Guess I really dodged a bullet when I dumped you, didn't I? Every head in the room turned. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and everyone waited to see how I would break. Looking into Brad's arrogant, mocking eyes, my mind involuntarily flashed back to 5 years ago, the darkest period of my entire life. Back then, we weren't just engaged, we were business partners. I had poured every single penny of my hard-earned life savings, along with countless sleepless nights, into developing a revolutionary logistics software platform. Brad had promised we were building our future together. But the moment the initial framework was complete, he made his move. He quietly transferred the core intellectual property into his own name, cut me out of the company completely, and walked away, leaving me crushed, utterly broke, and saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in joint organizational debt. He used my groundwork to launch his real estate tech venture, taking all the credit while publicizing that he'd dumped me because I was an ambitious drag on his financial future. I didn't break down or sue him back then. I didn't have the money to fight his legal team. Instead, I put my head down. For 5 long, grueling years, I lived on instant noodles in a tiny basement apartment, coding tirelessly until my eyes burned, quietly rebuilding and scaling an independent enterprise that eventually swallowed the market whole. Now, back in the glittering ballroom, Brad took a slow sip of his champagne, clearly enjoying the uncomfortable silence he had created. He stepped closer, leaning in with that same suffocating condescension I remembered all too well. "Come on, Chloe, don't be shy," he barked, deliberately gesturing toward a circle of influential local investors who were watching the spectacle unfold. "Tell everyone here what kind of meager salary you're scraping by on these days. Maybe I can find a spot for you as a receptionist at my firm out of pure charity." A few soft gasps echoed through the ballroom, followed by uncomfortable, hushed whispers. People were staring at me with a mixture of secondhand embarrassment and pity, expecting me to shrink back, burst into tears, or make a hasty run for the exit. Instead, I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply took a calm, deliberate sip of my sparkling water and met Brad's smug gaze with complete, icy composure. Seeing that his initial jab hadn't broken me, Brad doubled down. He gestured aggressively toward the group of prominent local businessmen standing beside him, raising his voice so the surrounding crowd couldn't possibly miss a single word. "Seriously, Chloe, I'm offering you a lifeline here. My real estate firm is expanding aggressively, and a simple administrative role would easily double whatever pocket change you're making now. All you have to do is swallow your pride and ask nicely." A few of his sycophantic friends chuckled nervously, eager to stay on the good side of the city's supposedly rising real estate mogul. I set my glass down on a nearby high-top table with a quiet, deliberate click. A small, polite smile touched my lips as I looked Brad up and down. "I appreciate the generous thought, Brad," I said, keeping my voice smooth and crystal clear. "But if I were you, I'd check your corporate email before making any big hiring decisions tonight. You might find that your company's situation is a little less expanding than you think." Brad's smug grin faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion crossing his eyes before he quickly forced a loud, boisterous laugh to cover it up. "Check my email? Please, Chloe, don't try to play smart to save face," he sneered, grabbing a wireless microphone from the DJ's table nearby. He tapped it twice, the sharp feedback screeching through the ballroom and drawing the attention of all 200 guests. "Attention, everyone," Brad announced grandly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I'd like to propose a quick toast to my ex-fiancée, Chloe. May she finally accept that some of us were born to lead empires, and some were born to—" Before he could finish his pathetic sentence, the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a dramatic bang. The entire room turned. 4 tall men dressed in dark, sharp tactical suits stepped in first, quietly positioning themselves along the entrance line. Right behind them walked my husband, Julian. At 30 years old, Julian possessed the kind of effortless, commanding aura that made an entire room instantly drop to silence. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, he exuded pure power and composure. Classmates near the door immediately started gasping and whispering frantically. Everyone recognized Julian. He was the legendary venture capitalist who had recently bought out the region's largest commercial holding firms and completely reshaped the city's financial landscape. Brad's jaw dropped slightly as Julian walked straight past the frozen crowd, completely ignoring the stunned looks around him. He didn't spare a single glance at the decorations or the grand venue. His focus was entirely on me. Julian stepped right up to my side, placed a warm, protective hand on my waist, and leaned down to press a gentle kiss to my cheek. Then, he unbuttoned his jacket, reached into his inner pocket, and pulled out a sleek, heavy leather portfolio. "Sorry I'm late, darling," Julian said, his smooth, deep voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Traffic was terrible, but I brought the final paperwork." Brad stood frozen, the microphone still clutched weakly in his hand, his eyes darting frantically between Julian and me. "Wait, Julian Vance." Brad stammered, his arrogant composure crumbling in real time. What are you doing here? Do you know this woman?" Julian turned toward him, reaching out and smoothly plucking the microphone right out of Brad's limp fingers. "I certainly do," Julian announced calmly into the mic, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Chloe Vance, the founder, majority shareholder, and CEO of Nexus Global Logistics. And, as of 20 minutes ago, your brand new boss." A collective, audible gasp rippled through the ballroom. Julian opened the leather portfolio, pulled out an official legal document stamped with a red seal, and handed it directly to Brad. "Your firm defaulted on its primary credit facility this afternoon, Brad. Nexus Global held 90% of your debt. My wife just executed the full foreclosure and acquisition clause." Brad's face drained of every single drop of color, turning a ghostly, sickly white. Right on cue, his phone in his jacket pocket began buzzing violently and continuously. The screen lit up with frantic calls from his board of directors, his primary bank, and his lead legal counsel. His entire fake empire had just collapsed around him in front of everyone. Brad stared down at the red-stamped foreclosure notice, his hands shaking so violently that the paper rattled against his fingers. The phone in his pocket wouldn't stop buzzing, a relentless vibration that felt like a ticking countdown to his total ruin. "And no, this is a mistake," Brad stammered, his voice dropping 3 octaves from the booming, arrogant roar he'd used just minutes ago. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute terror, completely stripping away 5 years of fake bravado. Chloe, please. We have history. You can't just liquidate my company. Everything I built is in that firm. Correction, Brad, I said, stepping forward, my voice remaining soft, steady, and utterly cold. Everything I built was stolen by you 5 years ago. You didn't build an empire. You built a house of cards financed by predatory loans issued through a subsidiary you were too careless to track. A subsidiary my parent company bought out 6 months ago. The surrounding classmates, who had been chuckling at Brad's cruel jokes moments before, suddenly pivoted. People began whispering loudly, glaring at Brad with disgust, while a few tried to step closer to offer me overly enthusiastic congratulations. I ignored their shallow attempts to win my favor, keeping my focus entirely on the man who had tried to destroy me. Julian stepped beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. You have 2 choices, Brad, Julian stated with clinical precision. You can sign the voluntary asset surrender form by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, or my legal team will file formal charges for systemic financial fraud and embezzlement based on your initial startup transfers. Brad sank weakly into a nearby chair, completely broken, silently staring at the floor as his entire world disintegrated around him. 3 weeks after that unforgettable night, Brad's real estate company was completely dismantled and restructured under the Nexus Global brand. Stripped of his titles, assets, and stolen prestige, Brad was forced to surrender his luxury sports cars and start over completely from square one, facing years of financial recovery. Walking away from that ballroom hand in hand with Julian, I realized something powerful. True success is never about shouting the loudest in a room, wearing expensive labels, or tearing down others to make yourself feel big. It's about putting your head down, doing the grueling work in silence, and letting your results deliver the ultimate answer when the time is right. I turned a devastating betrayal into an empire, and taught the man who ruined me that karma always collects its debts with interest. Now, I'd love to hear from all of you listening today. Have you ever faced someone who doubted or betrayed you, only to let your ultimate success be your quiet revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know which city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached.